Thank you, Chairman Engelbright and Chairman Godfrey. Thank you for this, and to the senators as well. It's distressing to me that after being given ample notice to provide this committee, this legislature, with documentation that was requested, that you still don't have it. I find that to be pretty disrespectful to the people of New York State and to this committee. You had plenty of time to provide it. You have yet to provide that. Is there a reason why we don't have it when it was asked for weeks and weeks ago?
I will look into the timing of that. I believe that it's been forwarded.
You believe what?
It's been sent.
It's been sent by last night? Last night, okay. And once again, we got another, it just seems to me that, it seems to me that we're intent again on blaming the EPA and taking absolutely no responsibility for any of this in Hoosick Falls. And there's a nice game going on between you're going to blame the EPA and then push responsibility onto the village, which is a small village, and meanwhile the DOH just continues to say we didn't do anything wrong. So it's distressing to hear that, and it's going to make for a fairly long day and some pretty intense questioning, because you can see I don't think that the members up here are quite buying the fact that the DOH holds no responsibility in this. Now I'm going to dig into a couple of things. And Dr. Wilson, I just want to point out, you said you were stressed and tired. I just want to point out that stressed and tired is the parents of Hoosick Falls when they opened up those envelopes and saw the blood level numbers of their children. That's stressed. That's tired. So excuse me if I don't have much sympathy for your stress. I have an entire community that's stressed.
I was not looking for sympathy. I just wanted to make sure if I said something that insulted somebody by accident, it was because of being stressed, not because I was looking for sympathy. I do not have any sense that I deserve any sympathy. So
thank you.
I really don't like that question.
So it wasn't a question; it was a statement. And what the other thing you just said, if you offended anybody by saying that, what's offensive to the people of Hoosick Falls, just so you all know, that are sitting right there denying anything went wrong here. What's offensive is that for 14 months or 18 months, they were not told that their water was tainted. Now, Dr. Zucker, here's a question. You have a law degree, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You have a medical degree,
that is correct.
Did you feel any legal obligation to inform the people of Hoosick Falls that their water exceeded EPA guidelines at the time you knew it?
Assemblyman, I take issue to some of your statements. Number one, the village, we worked closely with the village. Our team was out there in the village. We worked 3 days a week working with them regarding biomonitoring, regarding testing, regarding questions. We brought in outside experts. I think I sense that there is much anxiety and stress in the community. It's palpable, and it's appropriately palpable that they feel worried about their water. And I understand. I've had an opportunity to speak with members of Hoosick Falls. When I was out there, I had an opportunity to have dinner with a family of 3 generations of Hoosick Falls. So I think when you say that we didn't care about the village, that's
I didn't say that.
You said that
I asked if you felt that you had a legal obligation to inform the people that their water exceeded EPA guidelines at the time you knew it.
We followed the guidelines, and when it exceeded, we worked with the county and with the village, and there are letters from the mayor of Hoosick Falls to the community saying that we are working with them to be sure that they know that we are doing everything to decrease the PFOA. So we were doing that, and there are letters and there's communications with them all through end of 2014 and all through 2015.
But you never took action yourself or your department.
We took action.
No. There was a letter sent out in a water bill. Almost every person in here is going to open the water bill, look at how much they owe, and they pay the water bill. They're not going to go through it. And I read every one of those letters that were in the water bill, and not one of them was all that alarming, okay? It was not. So you felt no legal obligation to issue a do not drink the water advisory. You felt no legal obligation to do that.
So first, that is not correct. The village has been in constant communication. I'm reading from the mayor with the Rensselaer County and New York State Department of Health, and each has been very supportive of our efforts to learn how to mitigate and minimize the amount of PFOA in our finished water. This is written in March of 2015.
I'm aware. Did you take any action yourself to notify the public? Did you say, let me ask you a different, this one's simple. Would you have let your mother drink that water for 18 months?
You know, the water in 2015, and have them drink it, the concern is drinking it for decades. And I think we're not asking the question. The correct question is why for decades, for years and decades, the county the village was subjected to the pollution from a corporate polluter. That's what the issue is here. When we found out about this, we went in there and worked to decrease the PFOA that was there. 18
months the people weren't notified. That's a huge problem, Dr. Zucker, and you want to avoid it, but it is a major problem for the people of Hoosick Falls.
Assemblyman, I take issue with that. When we learned about this in August, and I absolutely feel for the community. Like I said, I have spoken with them, I've been there, and I recognize this. So I really do. But you're asking a question regarding when did the department go out there and do things? Once we learned about this in October, November, once it was confirmed, we went forward and we moved to figuring out what you could do to decrease the PFOA, and we followed what the recommendations were at 400, and we've spoken about the margin of protection, all of this. So we can come back to that issue, but I've answered that question before.
You knew in August of 14, correct?
No, in August of 14, a committed and dedicated resident sampled the water, and I applaud him for his efforts and what he did. And I believe he uncovered a rock, and we are sitting here because of what he has done to look at water. So kudos to him on that. However, as a scientist, we need to confirm that, and we moved forward to confirm that in October and in November, and we did just that.
In January of 2016, you stated that the state of New York would set a new level for PFOA within weeks. Did that ever occur?
In January 2016,
you stated multiple times that the state of New York would set a new level for PFOA within weeks. Has the state of New York ever set a new level for PFOA?
This is a national issue.
It's not my question, doctor. You stated that you would set a new level within weeks in January. I know it's a national issue. It's showing up in states all over the nation. But I'm asking you, as the head of a department, as the guardian of public health in New York, did you ever set a new level for PFOA?
As I said before, that we looked at this, we realized that this needs to be a bigger issue, and three governors, Governor Cuomo with the governors of New Hampshire and Vermont, turned to the federal government. Certain things need to be at a national level. We sit with many other areas. I know you're going to say it should be New York, but I could turn to some other areas. I could turn to the issue when it comes to safety, for example, the FAA. Use that as an example. The federal government sets certain levels for certain things, and this is one of those things. Water crosses state lines. It's different.
You're incorrect, and you're talking to a commercial airline pilot.
I'm talking about the
FAA
hours.
is national airspace. You have vast authority to set regulations and policy. And let me take a second back. You want to talk about a national policy. The EPA has repeatedly stated that fracking is safe, yet you stepped outside and beyond the EPA guidelines, issued a dictum that we would not frack. Now, how can it be that you ignore the EPA's guidelines there and say, we're going to go beyond that and not frack?
These are completely different issues.
They're not completely different.
They are completely different issues here.
How? The EPA stated that it was safe. The EPA stated it was safe to frack. Right? There's conflicting data, of course, like anything. But they stated that it was safe. You stepped beyond that and went beyond it and said, we're not going to frack in New York. Whether that was at Governor Cuomo's behest or not, I don't know. I suspect it was. But the fact is you ignored the EPA there, and here you also ignored them and went beyond their guidelines. And at what point, you talked also, doctor, about this is not a bright line, right? But it's not up to you to build in the margin of safety. The EPA already did that, because if it was up to you and DOHs around the states, then everybody would have a different level. So the EPA built the margin of safety in. Beyond that safety, I think I can speak for my constituents in Hoosick Falls when I say they had a right to be notified and you did not do it.
Assemblyman, in March of 2015, you were contacted.
Yes, I was.
And you did not respond to the community in that sense at that moment in time.
Incorrect. Incorrect.
You were notified in March
Incorrect.
2015.
Yep, and you're under oath just stating
As
something
I
incorrect.
understand-
I did respond. You know what the response was? They asked if we could get a couple of $1 million for a treatment system. They asked myself. They asked Senator Marchione. They asked County Executive Gimeno. They asked Congressman Gibson. They asked Senator Schumer and Gillibrand. And the response from all of us was the same. No, there is no money for that. That was the response from all of us. So yes, I did respond.
I just would like to make a couple of observations here. First, I know that there is strong feelings held in the audience, but please, this is a hearing, not a sports event, and so no cheering and or participation. Thank you. And secondly, to the extent possible, let's try to stay within the format of a hearing with questions and answers between the panel and members. And thirdly, I am just informed that the federal government has declared Hoosick Falls a federal Superfund site. That has just broken. That news has just broken. Okay, I'll return.
Thank you, Chairman.
The forum over to Mr. McLaughlin.
Dr. Zucker, at what point, at what level of PFOA would you have notified the public? Would you have felt an obligation to come forward? Would it have been 50,000? Because that's where New York State was.
The public was notified. We worked with the village. We told them they exceeded, with the exceedance of 400, we said we need to do everything to decrease the amount of PFOA in the water. We need to find the source and decrease it.
Understood, but again, not my question. At what point would you have notified the public? Is there any point below 50,000 parts per trillion where you would have notified the people of Hoosick Falls not to drink their water?
We spoke with, not directly the people of Hoosick Falls back at that point, but we spoke with the county and the town saying that there's an exceedance. And as I mentioned in the letters that have been put forth by the village to the community, saying there's an exceedance. That's how we work with the counties and the town.
Understood. You have a very small village with taxed resources up there.
I
you
understand.
have a lot of folks up there, Doctor, that don't even have internet. As short as a week ago, when the Senate held their hearings in Hoosick Falls, there was testimony from a resident whose father lives in downtown Hoosick Falls that did not know. And that's because he probably doesn't have internet. Nobody knocked on the door. What steps did you, as the Department of Health Commissioner, or Commissioner Zagos take, or the Department of Emergency Services take to get out there and go door to door, knock on every door in that village, there's not that many of them, to make sure the people knew? Because this is a whole other issue, but we have a real communication problem up there. You have very rural areas up there.
We were out there. We were out there 3 times a week. We had town meetings in the village, in the Armory. We worked with the community. There are many times we worked closely with the mayor. We worked closely, particularly subsequently when we were doing more testing. I know I personally was out there. I spoke to the people in the community as well. Brad, did you want to add something?
I think it's helpful to remember that the requirement under the federal rules for unregulated contaminants is that the water system needs to put this in their annual water quality report, which was unacceptable to us. That's the requirement that EPA has. So we advised the water system to notify residents. They did so 3 times in water bills and provided updates, as I know you're aware. We attended public meetings repeatedly over the course of that time frame. We pursued the testing of private wells, installed more than 900 POET systems. We have been in the community routinely, right from the very beginning, Assemblyman. And Dr. Wilson was there throughout the time, advising the water system, advising the residents, working to reduce exposure on the public water systems, and we're really proud of the efforts we've undertaken to work to do that.
There was no reduction in exposure in the public water system until the filtration system came online. Until that time, the PFOA-filled water was flowing through those pipes. So why, if you knew, that there was, you've said health effects, I say probable links to cancer, which the C8 study definitively declares that there's probable links to numerous cancers and diseases. If you knew that, why didn't you just immediately say, look, we don't even really know what this stuff is or does yet, but we're going to find out, and until then, we want you on bottled water. Why did 18 months elapse?
I'm going to answer that, but your first statement, I want to clarify it, and I'm going to ask Dr. Wilson to refer about when you were talking about the levels and how long they were until it came back down.
So it's good to kind of put the time frame together on all of this because you're asking questions about timing. So October, November, the village does what is the right thing. They take 2 rounds of samples. We get the results. Now, we're integrating information. It's not just simple, when did this start or when did this stop? There's information being integrated the whole time through this whole process. So one of the first things is, well, the village should be telling people that something's going on. And I think there's evidence, you know, you've already cited some of it, but there's some other things that happen as well. They have a water advisory committee set up in January. Then they also, if you can look at the village board minutes, you see that in the village board that the water issue is now being discussed. If you look at the popular press, in January of 2015, there's an article in the Troy Record and elsewhere about the fact that there's contamination. The normal mechanism is that the water supply is doing the communication with the residents. This is what's happening. We're going through that process, and from what we're seeing, it looks like communication efforts are ongoing. They update the village in April. They send another one in August. So from our perspective, the village is doing what should be done, and that is provide the citizens of Hoosick Falls information. By the way, that's being confirmed by articles in the popular press. So it's not like somebody's hiding anything, anybody's keeping it quiet. So that's happening. So in December, now we got the results. We know that there's PFOA in there, somewhere in the range between 150 and 400, or excuse me, 540. So it's a range. Some of it's below, some of it's above. Looking at EPA guidance, what's the first thing that should be done? Let's reduce the levels. So immediately we start thinking about how that can happen. And the village is engaged in those discussions. They've hired a consultant to work on that. We're giving them the knowledge that we have so that they can move forward in as fast as a possibility. In January and February, they're doing 2 or 3 things. They tried an experiment to see if they could get the levels reduced immediately, adding an aggregate, for lack of better words. It doesn't work. They tried switching just to well 3, which had the lower levels. Unfortunately, they couldn't sustain the system just on well 3.
Excuse me, what was this? This was December? When was this?
They went to well 3 in December of 14.
Of 14.
Okay. So, again, we have values between 150 and 540. We're straddling that numbers, that 400 number. It's not a bright line. There's a large margin of protection. But let's get the stuff out of the water. So we got to figure out where the source is. So why we start trying to figure out where the source is. And there's a couple possibilities. It could be we all live in a world where Teflon and Teflon-related products are in every room of our life. So it's possible some of the pump components. They had new microfilters to deal with microbial contamination, and that they were put in 2009. We had to evaluate whether those microfilters had materials on them. So we go through this systematic approach, while at the same time, simultaneously, start exploring ways to remove it, because it doesn't matter exactly where the source is, we're still going to have to remove it. And so we got both of those efforts happening in January and February and March. By the end of March, we can't find a quick fix. We can't find there's a pump that's leading to the issue. We can't just add a coagulant and find out that it settles out. We can't, the river was a potential source. The river was monitored. The river wasn't the source. We knew that. So we've gone through all of those evaluations, doing all of this work in consultation with the village. The village, as the owner of the supply, is doing the work, and at the same time now, it's clear that we want to work on a treatment system. There's 2 or 3 systems that could work, reverse osmosis. The village does a field trip to a nearby reverse osmosis system. They start entertaining the idea of GAC. From our work, it looks like GEC is the most feasible method, and that they should work forward with that. So they send water in that January, February, March time period down to Pittsburgh to the company to have it tested. Actual 50-gallon, could be 55, whatever the gallons were. They were sent down to Pittsburgh and to run through a GAC testing program to see whether that would be an effective. You got to evaluate each water on its own, all right? We couldn't just say that because it worked elsewhere, it would work here. Different components might make that carbon different efficiencies. So all of that's going on, and by the time we get to the end of March and April, we're like, it's very clear it's groundwater contamination. It's not a component. It's not a chemical being added to the system, which that's something else we have to worry about. You know, as I said, water systems are really complex. You have a source to worry about. Then you have the transmission line from the source to the treatment plant. Then you have the treatment plant. At the treatment plant, people are adding chemicals, removing chemicals. You got to understand what's going on there. Then it goes into a distribution system. Who knows what's going on with the distribution system? So it's not an easy thing. At the end of March, early April, we're like, hey, it's clearly groundwater. We tell DEC, and we're now like, okay, what is the remaining issue? The remaining issue is it's very clear that there's contamination in this public supply. We're following EPA's guidance. The one thing that's really sitting out there that is not being addressed is private wells. And so we start saying, we better start worrying about private wells. And so, and I know, you know, this is an unfortunate thing in life, is that there is some steps that you have to take. We just couldn't turn to our lab and say, hey, we want to go sampling April 2nd. We had to confirm with EPA and confirm with the environmental laboratory approval programs that we could have the authority to use our lab. So we had to check with our own regulations, with EPA's regulations, and we do that. We also have to make sure that we have the technical know-how. Luckily, our Wadsworth Center is a great lab, and they had been doing PFOA. They weren't certified by EPA, and that was part of the issue as to whether we could use them or not. And so we had all those discussions. We had to get the resources. By the time we get it all lined up, it's June 3rd or 4th. And we go sample the private wells. And so I guess where I'm going with this is we were following EPA's guidance. We understood the margin of protection. We saw that the village was putting things out. And yeah, there's if you want to know where one place could be improved that I've seen is the landlords, all right? The landlords get the information with their water bill and may not share it with the tenants. That is something that needs to be addressed somewhere, and it's not just a Hoosick Falls issue. So we see communications going on. We see that we're following EPA's guidance. We see that the village is making every strong effort to figure out how to solve the problem. And we're giving them assistance as much as we can. We offer to do the sampling in June because it's expensive. The village has spent 10 grand already on sampling analysis, and that's a lot of money for that village. So we spent 10 grand doing the analysis in June. And by the way, everybody knows what happened. We found PFOA in private wells. We didn't give up. We didn't give up. We did test a school that time, and we got a non-detect, which was great news. But we found PFOA contamination in a greater area than we anticipated. And so we had to sit back and think about, why are we seeing it? And so it doesn't make sense. So we come up with another sampling plan, and this time we expanded. Instead of being along the corridor of Route 22. And there was a logical reason for us to go there, and I'm already taking too much time, so I won't go into it. But we decided that the corridor of 22 was kind of the most likely place for us to find private well contamination. But we found it further north and further south than we anticipated. And we didn't say, okay, let's hide it. We said, you know what? We better go all the way on the other side of the village to the northeast. We better go up to the northwest. And we better go all the way over to the east. And we did. And lo and behold, we found low levels, 10 parts per trillion now, in those areas. But we didn't say, wow, oh, that's it's 10 parts per trillion. It's below the 400. No issue. We said, no, there's something going on here that needs to be followed up on. We better do more to understand whether that 10 is representative of all of those areas or whether that 10 is just an indication that we're on the fringe of a source that we don't still understand. And we still don't. And so we did all of those things. And you know, it's all with the understanding. You know, I hate to say this, but every one of you, every time you drink water, you have a contaminant in it. I don't know how much it is.
Yeah.
I don't know the levels. I don't know the health risk. But every single time we drink water, if you were to drink pure water, it would be unhealthy for you. Pure water would not, it wouldn't taste good, so none of us would do it, all right? None of us would do it. We would go, and throw it out.
Doctor, I got you. But during that entirety of the bulk of what you just went over timeline-wise, the fact is that the people of Hoosick Falls were denied vital information that they needed. They were not on bottled water until November of 2015. So yes, they got some information, but listen, there's nobody, Senator DeFrancisco pointed it out, rightly so. You know, you can't read the English language and really get enraged, but you wouldn't get fired up with those letters. Do you think maybe the village, this is a small village with a part-time administration doing the best they can. Do you think maybe they were confused by the guidance they were getting from you? Because you stated you were confused by the EPA. I don't know how. It's pretty clear that 400 was the guideline, but you repeatedly said you're confused. Do you think maybe the village got confused by the guidelines they were getting from you or the guidance they were getting?
I think the communication to the village through the, well, first I'd like to say one thing. I'd like to say what you just heard from Lloyd is the dedication and the commitment of our team, and Lloyd's just one of many who are out there in the village constantly throughout the winter and throughout the year prior to that working on this. So when one says that we weren't engaged in those 18 months, that's not true at all. As you've just heard, we were actively engaged in this. We communicate, in response to your question, we communicated with the village about this information. I understand this is a complex subject, and I understand the confusion. But as I said, we were working aggressively to address this problem.
Last question. Do you have documentation that shows you speaking with Saint-Gobain about setting up the bottled water delivery? Because as far as I know, Mayor Borsch really did a good job taking the lead trying to get them to handle that situation. And I've seen pushback from the EPA that was critical of your department, saying that you were in fact letting the village handle too much of this. So who set up the bottled water delivery program?
So number one, we worked with the village on this. The testing in June was done by us, by the state. That was our testing that came back later in the summer. Regarding the question of documentation, I can look into this, but I don't want to make a prediction, but I'm sure there's communication documentation on this. But I know our team was working with Saint-Gobain and with the village together to move forward on this.
I have one last one. I'll probably be back. During this entire time, which I firmly believe was a failure to protect the citizens of New York State, during this time, Governor Cuomo had a 90-day email deletion policy in place. Were any of your emails between the EPA, the village, and or the county deleted as a result of that policy?
Well, number one, I take issue with your statement that it was a failure. It was not a failure at all. We worked diligently on this, as you've just heard. So I will have to take issue with saying that this was a failure on the part of the department. Regarding the emails are always around, as far as I know.
How are they around if we were under a 90-day policy?
What?
Were you purging emails at any time during this time frame?
I can answer my emails are there. I mean, I'm sure if you.
So you were not following the governor's policy.
My emails, whatever, I don't do the ITS. My emails, I answer. If someone sends me something, I reply. It's not like I then remove them. So they're there.
90 days later? I mean, there was a policy in place, was there not? You were commissioners. You should be aware of the policy.
We have the email. I guess you're referring back to the emails with EPA because that's what you're asking about.
No, I'm really referring to any and all emails and whether any of them were subject to that deletion policy.
I can't answer the question. I know when it comes to ITS, there's information in there, and I respond to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to Senator Hannan.
Thank you. I don't think I'll ask questions relative to the time frame, because there's been so many questions asked